This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, we will be recording this session. So this is the first session of the development. I will be teaching you from the scratch, like what is Salesforce development, why we need, who will be using that, how you will accommodate all the development functionalities in the projects. So we will start with the MVC. As the name suggests, MVC stands for Model View Controller. The purpose and the functionality of these I will explain in the detail. See, model view controller, these are the three different terminologies which we use here. View represents the UI means where actually user can interact. Another is controller. As the name suggests, controller means there is something which will be controlling the entire flow. Entire flow means the whatever the business logic you will have, you need to write that business logic inside the controller. Last one is model means your database like where you store the data, or from where you can retrieve the data and you can display that data on the UI. So quickly let me draw this diagram. With the help of this diagram I will explain you guys what is the use of each, like model view controller. Let's say view is the UI presentation layer which we have, and we use web pages here. We also use here JavaScript, we also use CSS, we can also use HTML for the UI layer. Another is the controller. As the name suggests, something which will control the entire flow. So that is the controller which we have, and for the controlling part we use Apex to write the business logic. That means whatever the logic you write, or when you create any Apex class and you create certain functions, methods, blocks in that, that is part of the controller. Another is the model, or you can say your DB, database, where you interact, you retrieve the data from database, you insert the data into the database. So that is part of your model. So this is we call model view controller. Let's understand this with one example. Let's say someone asks you to display certain records of any object in Salesforce. So requirement is display 20 account records. That is the requirement using web pages, because in Salesforce now we have three different approach. One is web page, another is lightning aura component, and another one is lightning web components. So now first we will talk about visual force pages. So let's see how we will be going to use which function. Let me draw this here. And what will be the flow? Here you can understand. Let's say when we are talking about to display the account records and 10 account records, means we will place the request from this web page to the server side controller. We also call it server side controller because going further we will have one more controller, that will be client side controller, means JavaScript controller. So let's say you place the request from web page, or from your view to the Apex, and you ask for the 10 or 20 account records. Your controller will have the queries, SQL queries, by which you will contact to the database, and here with the help of queries you will ask your database or your model to retrieve and to send 20 account records first back to the controller, and from controller to the your view part, presentation layer or your UI layer. So that is the flow of MVC, model view controller, where we use all these terminologies in detail when we write the code. or when we work on any requirement. So again, one more time I'm explaining, MVC stands for Model View Controller, that is the architecture of Salesforce, which we use to work on any project. Here view represents the UI layer, and we use Visual Force pages, HTML, CSS, JavaScript to create the UI or to build the UI or view. Controller represents to the server side controller or Apex, where we write the business logic, and model stands for your database, where actually you store the data, you retrieve and you insert the data. All right, let's move to the next slide here. Define a class. Okay, before we define the class, let's understand what is the class. So by definition, class is the blueprint of an object. If we talk about the class in Apex or Salesforce, so we call it class is a blueprint of an object. Or you can also give another definition. Class is a container where you can actually define or declare the attributes, variables. You can define different kind of methods. In different kind of methods means you can have static, non-static functions inside your class. You can have static and non-static variables as well in the class, which you use in the functionality or in the project. Or you can say like class is a place where you actually write the business logic to interact with your view and your database. All right, let's see how you can create the class. Let's go to your developer console. I will open the developer console here to write the code or to create the Apex class. So to create the new Apex class, go to the file, new, and Apex class. So here you need to write the name of the Apex class. This name can be anything. First Apex controller. Here CTRL stands for the controller, because this is the controlling part, or this is your controller or your Apex class where you will write the business logic. Whenever you create the class, we have certain naming conventions. So first letter of each word should be capital. For example, here I'm using a combination of three words: first, Apex, and controller. So each letter of these words starting with the capital: first F capital, A capital, C capital. Okay, so inside this class you can declare any kind of variables, or we can also call it attributes. We use variables to store the data. Variables can contain any kind of data depending on the data types. So data types we have in Salesforce, we have different type of data types in Salesforce. We use those to store the different type of data. We'll talk about these data types in details, but before that, let's talk about the access modifier. Like what is access modifier, how to use access modifiers, and what is the purpose and agenda of these access modifiers. So quickly, let me draw one diagram. Access modifiers. With the help of this diagram, I'll demonstrate you the different access modifiers. So we have three access modifiers in Salesforce, which we usually use three. So I'll talk about those three in detail. We have global, we have public, and so majorly we deal with these three access modifiers. So as the name suggests, access means when we use these modifiers, these define the accessibility of your variables or your methods or your class. Means wherever you use these variables or these keywords, basically these are the keywords in Salesforce in language. Wherever you will put these keywords, these will define the accessibility of your class. your methods or variables. Global means when you declare any class global, that class or that method or that variable can be accessed outside of your Salesforce org. So we use global keywords when we integrate Salesforce with third party. Means when we communicate between two different systems, let's say Salesforce and SAP or Java, .NET or PHP, that can be any medium. We declare our classes, our methods, our variables global. Public means when you are declaring any class, any method, any variable public, that can be used inside the org, or you can access those methods or variables outside of the class as well. When you define the private, so private means we are restricting the access, means your method or your variable cannot be accessed outside of the class. We are limiting to the scope of that method or variable. So let me put some arrows here. So at one side you see the downside arrow, and another side you see the upside arrow. Downside arrow means accessibility is decreasing, means the almost global is having the most accessibility, then public, then private. And this side where we have the upside arrow means we are opening up the accessibility. Private is restricted, then we have public, means public keyword will have more accessibility as compared to private. Global keyword has more accessibility as compared to your public and the private keywords. So we will see these when we will declare the any variable, any method. Before we declare any function, any variable, any method, let's also talk about the data types. This is also important, and understand the use case of data types, why we need the data types. As the name suggests, data types means it will be going to help us to identify the type of data, means what kind of data you want to store in the Salesforce, or in the you want to contain the type of data in Apex. You have the options to declare those variables with respect to data type. We have certain data types in Salesforce, like we have string, we have decimal, we have long, we have boolean, uh, we have date as well, we have date time. A part of that, we also have the array or the object data type. In object means we can define generically as object. These as object can be your Salesforce standard object or Salesforce custom objects. And when we talk about the collection, means collection is also the type which we use to store the data. So here collection, let me write again. Collection means we have list, we have set, and we have map. So we will learn about these collections, objects, and data types in detail, step by step. So now you got it about like what is MVC, then what is class, what are the access modifiers, and what are the data types. Now let's see with an example by creating and by defining or declaring the variables. So let's jump back to the Apex class. Here we can define class level variables. Class level variables means we are going to declare these attributes or variables at the class level, means these are not inside of any block or any method. So scope of these variables will be in the entire class. Let's define some attributes. Let's say public string my name, public string my address. You can define certain attributes as private as well. Private boolean is flag. Let's define public date, today date, public date, time. Even you can make a default. We have default type as well, means there is no type, it's a system default type. Date, that is a type. Date, time, like, and we can have any variable name, today date, time. So these are the attributes which I have declared here. Now I will initialize those variables. So to initialize, we any class level attribute. Initialize means we will define the default values. We will initialize the default values for these attributes, and we use constructor. Means let me write the constructor here. That will be default constructor. Understand like what is constructor, why we need, and what is the identification of the constructor. Your constructor will always have the same class type and the class name. If you see, like, type of the class is public, so type of your constructor is also public. Name of the class is first apex controller, and name of the constructor is also same. So your constructor will always have the same name as the class name, and it won't return you anything. Another identity or the recognition of the constructor is it won't have any return type. We use constructor to initialize the default value, because when we will create or the instance of the class, or when we instantiate the apex class, the same time our constructor will call, and whatever the logic you have written inside the constructor, that will run. Okay, so without any delay, let's debug these. So how to debug any variable in the Salesforce? We will use system.debug. In Java, we use system.out.println to debug any output or to print any data. In C, we use printf, and in Salesforce, we use system.debug. System.debug. Let's print the default values first. We will check what all default values we have for these variables. I will debug all 5 variables first, and we'll check. After that, we will initialize these variables with some values. We will define some values to these attributes. Okay, as I said, when we create the instance of the class, the same time our default constructor will run, or our constructor will run. Not only default, all the constructor will run. If you have the parameterized constructor, you need to pass the parameter or argument when you are creating the instance. How to instantiate the class? Let's open the anonymous block. So to open the anonymous block, go to the debug. Here you have open execute anonymous window, or you can press Control plus E. So here we will instantiate the class. Here it will start with the class name, then the reference variable, let's say obj class equals to new, and again class name. This is the way by which we create the instance of the class, or we instantiate the class. So when we will run this, it will be going to call the default constructor automatically, because when we are instantiating this, we are not passing any attribute or any parameter in that. So let's run this and check the output. So we have null for each and everything which we have declared, means even your boolean attribute is also have the null value. Ideally this will have true or false, but what happens when we do not initialize any value? It will have null because we have declared these attributes and we are printing these. Now let's define some values to these attributes. So my name is Kumar, my address is Noida, is flag equals make it true. Today date, we will use the system function to get the today date. We have system dot today. So you can check the return type of this. This is the system class, and the return type of today is date. Put today date time. Let's use again the system function dot now. You can see again the this is the system class, and the function is now. Return type of this function is date and time, or date time. Now let me debug these again. I have saved the class. Again, another important thing which you should know when, let's say I'm going to edit the class. Right now there is no asterisk or star on that. When I edit something, there is a star. Let's say when I save it, if my class is saved successfully, we don't have any star, you can see. If our class is not saved, we will have a star like that. And if is there any error, it will give you the error. For example, let's say if I remove this semicolon and I try to save, it will become here in the expression in red color, and it will, you can check the problems by going through here problems. It's saying missing semicolon at is flag, means it's also giving the line number 16. What is missing? The semicolon at is flag. At this flag means we have one attribute is flag. Above to that we are missing that. So here let me put semicolon again and save it. It's saved. Now let's run it again. Let's check the output. Here we got the output. My name is Kumar, my address is Noida, is flag true. Today date, it's giving the today's date, and along with the today's date and time.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Am
Yes.
I audible, sir?
Yeah, you are audible. Please tell me
Sir, can you please tell me how what to write in deb anonymous window?
what to write in anonymous window. See, we are just creating the instance of this class here in anonymous window. So we are not writing anything. Our entire logic is here inside this constructor, because we are constructing our variables, or we are giving the default values. But you can write your scripts here. You can define the, even though variables value, you can initialize those. You can write the code snippet in this anonymous window, and you can execute your class. You can run your class functions from here. Okay.
Okay, sir.
All right. Okay, now let's talk about some method declarations. Then we'll also, we have also seen the debugging results. After that we'll talk about naming conventions and code commenting. So how we can define the methods here inside this class only. I will declare some methods. As I said, we can declare the static and non-static methods inside this class. So let's declare first non-static method, public void display result. So this is our non-static method, and we are not returning anything from this method because here type is void. So when we give the void type means we are not expecting anything from this method to be returned, or this method won't return anything. But when we define anything as a return type, or you can define in return type you can define any data type, any collection, any class, any object. So let's say if I define a string means I need to return anything in the string format. If you see, it will be giving the error missing return statement required return type string. So if I return something like that, return, even though this is the code which represents the string, it will save. So this method is expecting that we should return something because the return type is string. If we revert is and make it void, that means we don't need to revert anything. If we can try to save, it will save. All right, now let's debug something here. Hey, I am in display results function. When I call it function or method, both are same, or we can also call it block. Okay. Now let's see how we can run this non-static method, or how we can call it, or how we can execute it. So to execute this, go back to the anonymous window here. Okay, we will use this instance variable to call this non-static method, display results. Let's check for the debug. Okay, hey, I'm in display results. You can see results function. I'm making a call to this function here, so that is the reason I'm getting the output. So that was this non-static method, and this is the fundamental of the language. When you are calling or going to call the non-static function, you need to create the instance, or you need to use the instance of this class. But on the other hand, let's say if you want to call the static method, let me declare one static method here. That's my static method, and let me put some debug here, system dot debug. I'm in static function, then the function name show details. So as I said, when we are going to call the static method, we can call that method directly by the class name. We don't need instance of that class to call the static function, because static variable represents the class level properties. Means when we load the class, all your static properties or variables will load the same moment. So let's call this. As I said, we will be going to use the class name. Let's call it, hey, I'm in static function show details. Okay, let's see if I try to do vice versa. Means vice versa means I try to call non-static function by the class name, it will give me the error. It's saying non-static method cannot be referenced from a static context. Means you cannot call non-static function by the help of class name. In similar fashion, let's try to call static function by the instance variable. It will give you the same. Static method cannot be referenced from a non-static context. Means you cannot call static function by the reference variable, you need to have the class name. That was the one way. Okay, now let's say I don't want to make a call, and when I'm creating instance of the class, same time I want to call these functions, so I can do method chaining. Means I can call my function, I mean this function from this constructor, and this static function from this non-static method. I'll remove these, and I will simply create the instance, and I'll get entire things in that output. You can see everything is here. That means we can do method chaining, we can call our functions from the constructor as well, or we can do method chaining, means we can chain the functions, we can call one function from the another function, like that. So that is the fundamental of methods. Let's talk about the naming convention. Means we use the camel cases when we declare the methods. Another important thing is you can see when I declare the class, I was using the first letter of each word is capital, but when I declare any attribute, any variable, I start with the small. Means if your variable has multiple letters, multiple words in that, the first letter of each word will be small, and another letter of another word will be in capital. Same thing will apply on the methods. You can see, so we should apply the camel cases. This is the part of the camel cases. Means first letter of each word of first word will be in small, and after that it will have the capital letters. I'm ending this today's session here. I'm open up for the Q&A questions. You can ask any question if you have. You can ask me your questions, your queries.